Born and educated in California, the first 14 years of her academic career were with a university in Nigeria. Today she leads one of the oldest colleges in the United States, with a very modern focus on global education. Eileen Wilson-Oyelaran, president of Kalamazoo College, is this week's leader on leadership.
Knowing when to ask for help is critical when you're in a leadership position.
It's getting the best out of people. That's the essence of leadership.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration.
Welcome to Leaders on Leadership, here with a student audience on the campus at Wayne State University and Detroit Public Television Midtown Detroit studio. I'm Larry Fobes. Eileen Wilson-Oyelaran's personal involvement in global education began with 2 study abroad experiences during her college years in California. Thanks for being here, Eileen.
Thank you for having me.
Now, your first study abroad was when you were doing your undergraduate work at Pomona, and you went to that exotic country called England.
Yes.
Despite all the similarities in language and history, did that turn out to be a transforming experience, or was that just a vacation with classes?
Well, it was a very seminal experience for me. I had been to Mexico for family vacations, but one of the mistakes we make about England is thinking that it is like the United States. It's a very different culture. So I was immersed in a different culture and spent a lot of time with the immigrant communities in London. So the West African community, the Caribbean community, the Indian and Pakistani community, and I was studying the education of immigrant children to see if it would have any value in helping to understand the education of students of color in the United States. So it was a profoundly important learning experience for me, and was the basis for me deciding that I would study abroad in another place at another time.
And that other place, other time, was when you were in graduate school at Claremont, and then you went to Africa.
Yes, I did.
And you've said that your focus on Africa came from a couple of different sources: interest of your father, student movements at the time, and the work that you did in London. How did those 3 different things come together?
Well, I grew up during the early phase of the African independence movement. And as that was covered on television, my father made sure that we recognized that this was a very important historical moment. We also had, through our church, African students who lived in our home for short periods of time, maybe a graduate student at UCLA or somewhere. And so we had that connection. And then as I did my work in England, I saw the immigrants coming from these countries. So that was another important piece of putting it all together. The student movement was an important piece because I was working with a group of junior high school students, and I was teaching African history and culture. And one of the things that I learned very quickly was that the power of television was so great that the images of Tarzan and the other rather pejorative images that were very common at the time were having a more profound influence on these young men and women than the books they were reading. And so I was really interested in providing visual materials that might be as powerful as television and might counter those images.
I know people in my corporate life who got work assignments overseas, and they never really got into the sense of place. They lived there, but they weren't part of the community. I saw photographs of you in Africa riding around in a cattle truck. How did you?
You really did your research.
How did you force yourself, or was it easy for you to get out and meet new people and try new things in a new country?
That was one of my goals during the travel, was to come to know the countries as much as possible. I was very lucky because my mother had a former teacher who had been quite involved in West Africa, and she opened doors for me that got me to places I otherwise would not have been. And you don't know a culture until you immerse yourself in it. That's one of the things that drives our work at Kalamazoo College, is that we want our students to be deeply immersed in the cultures that they visit.
After that experience, you were there
about 18 months.
18 months, came back and finished your PhD work.
That's correct.
And then went back and took your first career work at a university in Nigeria.
That's correct.
Now that's not a typical career path for newly minted PhDs in the United States. How important is it, do you think, for young emerging leaders to follow their passion and do what they want to do and not necessarily game their career by going this job or that job?
I think you've got to decide what you want in your life. I guess I have always trusted that if I did my best, things would work out well. And by the time I finished my graduate career, I really wanted to go back and be involved in a developing country where I thought my talents could be utilized. And in fact, I never looked for a job in the United States when I began my professional job search. I looked for a job in Tanzania, I looked for a job in Ghana, and I looked for a job in Nigeria, the 3 countries where I had visited, and was lucky to have a choice to choose one from the 3.
And it obviously worked. You were there 14 years.
That's correct.
If you think back about those 14 years, there were, I think I counted 3 military coups.
Yes, at least 3.
An election that was kind of botched.
Yes.
You found a husband.
Yes.
Started a family.
Yes.
How does that whole 14-year experience change the way that you lead now that you're back in the United States?
I think one of the things that may be very different between West African cultures and the dominant American culture is a real sense of community and connection to people, and also in some ways a better attention to balance. So if you don't mind my telling a little story, when I was department chair here in the United States, after I had returned, one of our faculty members had a fire in her office, and she lost a significant amount of her work. And I said to the department, when are we going to her home to visit her and console her, which is what you would do in Nigeria without thinking about it. It happened that this faculty member was from Egypt, and bringing the department to her home to sit with her, I don't think we were there more than a half an hour, transformed my relationship with her as the department chair, but also transformed her relationship with the department. And yet when I first said, when will we do this, everybody kind of looked at me like, what? And I said, yes, this is what we're going to do. So I think as you become immersed in a culture, and if you have the luck to become bicultural, and I actually think of myself as tricultural, you are able to bring, I think, the strongest elements of your intercultural experience into whatever your context you have, and it actually gives you more tools in your toolkit.
So it's important that leaders be flexible and adjust the way they do their business depending on the situation they're in, whether it's internal or external change?
Absolutely. And paying attention to context, paying attention to what kind of leadership skills at a particular moment are warranted. I think a good leader has a toolkit. A good leader may be a dominant leader at one point, may be a quiet backdoor leader at another point, may be a questioning leader at another point. And part of figuring out what's required at any particular moment is the ability to step back, to reflect, to analyze context, and to have quite a few options in your toolbox.
Now, as you're developing that toolbox, you're going through a series of jobs, North Carolina, Wesleyan, Winston-Salem State, and then you went to Salem College.
Yes.
A series of jobs there, vice president of the academy, president of the company, the college for a
Yes.
while,
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 leadership jobs. Now that's a very old school. That's one of the very oldest in the
Yes.
country. So we assume there's a lot of ingrained tradition.
Yes.
How does a leader go into that kind of a school, respect the tradition that's there and keep the strengths, but keep making changes so things go forward into the new world?
I think that's a challenge in any institution in the academy. First, Salem was older, it's 1772, had its own traditions, and I think any college or university has deep traditions. So part of what enables you to think about how change will occur is the culture of the institution itself. Salem was very open to change because it had had some severe financial challenges that made it very important for the institution to be nimble. I actually think the harder situation is an institution that's doing very well and therefore has nothing to stir up the inertia. I really think that's where the challenge is, and because Salem had had some challenges, people were more open to addressing how do we need to think about our next steps? What do we need to be doing? What you didn't mention is that Salem is a women's college, and women's colleges are also very challenged in this environment. Alternatively, I came to Kalamazoo, a wonderful institution that was doing very well, and then the challenge is how do you open the conversation about what we need to be doing next? How do you do it in a way that doesn't say to people what you're doing now is not good, but rather says the world is changing very rapidly. Our institutions traditionally have not changed rapidly. What should we be doing now?
When you came to, okay, you're now talking about Kalamazoo. For people who don't know, tell us what is Kalamazoo College? What does it try to achieve? How does it try to achieve it?
Thank you. Kalamazoo College is a truly remarkable place. It sits halfway between Detroit and Chicago. We've got about 1,400 students. They come from 38 states and about 30 countries. About 20% of our students are United States domestic students of color. About 19% of our students are the first in their families to ever go to college. And we are known for our Kalamazoo plan. That's what we call our curriculum. It is an incredible mix of rigorous academic exploration, study abroad opportunities that are immersive, service learning opportunities, and a deeply crafted independent research project. So we put all those things together and call it the K plan. And it is the K plan that really makes our institution unique. In fact, we say our institution is Zoonique. And there's a real global flavor on campus because of the fact that our students are studying abroad and because of the international presence on our campus and because we think that's valuable in the curriculum. Our students go on, we have a very high number. In fact, we're in the top 20 of liberal arts colleges that send students to graduate school. Some of the most popular areas are the sciences and foreign language. We're among the top institutions for students who elect to go into the Peace Corps among colleges our size. We produce leaders. We've got the former head of the Red Cross. We've got a member now who's serving in the President's Domestic Policy Council. The head of the Civil Air Patrol right now, the first woman head of the Civil Air Patrol, is a Kalamazoo College alum. Our education is transformational.
When you said to students, when the students go under study abroad projects, what can you do as a president to make sure that it is a transformational experience for them and is not just a break from Kalamazoo winter?
You know, that's a great question, and at the heart of that question is really what happens in a liberal arts college. It's not what I do, it's what the faculty does. And we have a faculty that has made a real commitment to this international experience. So we ensure that it's immersive. Most of our students spend some time with families as part of that process. If they are in an institution of higher education, they're in the residence halls with other students. About 2/3 of our programs are given in language that is not English, so students have to have a certain proficiency in the language before they go. Then many of our students do something we call the Intercultural Research Project, where they are either doing service or they're doing some kind of oral history or other study that deeply immerses them in an aspect of that culture. We've had students do films on forms of dance, for example, in India, where they've had to really get into the community before they can do the filming. So the goal is that it's immersive, and that when students come back, by helping them reflect on their experiences, and we have a series of things they do when they come back, that they're in it and then they're stepping back from it to think about what they've learned.
Thanks for being here, Eileen.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with Eileen about a college president's role in the community and beyond the college campus. Welcome back to Leaders on Leadership. Joining us today is Eileen Wilson-Oyelaran, president of Kalamazoo College. Let's talk a little bit about your role beyond the campus walls. What can a university president do to help ensure that the high schools who are preparing the students for university are actually getting the students ready for college work?
I think that's a very, very critical part of our work, not only because we worry about the pipeline, but we worry about the communities in which our students are going to serve. At Kalamazoo, we have a very engaged and well-developed service learning program, and we have students involved in the public schools at almost every level. But then again, I try to be involved in activities that will lead to better educational outcomes in the community. My background is in early childhood education. So for the last year and a half, I have been leading an effort in Kalamazoo to look at early childhood education and its link to future school success. I served on the strategic planning committee for the Kalamazoo public schools and have a very, very good relationship with the superintendent. I think that's a very important part of our work.
Now, once the students get to campus, you made the statement once, blazingly obvious, but we need to remember that the job of teachers is to get students to think.
Yes.
What can a university president do to make sure that students across the campus are being forced to think and not just memorize pages from the book?
I think at the presidential level, the goal is to look at our outcomes. What are our students achieving? How can we demonstrate that if we say our students are learning critical thinking, we can show it? Kalamazoo College, for example, participates in the Collegiate Learning Assessment. It is a very, very complex instrument that attempts to determine what value the institution adds to the competencies that a student has when he or she enters the college. And we found that our results are in fact among the best in the country in terms of our students' ability to communicate, to make a good argument, and to analyze data. If we had found that we were not doing well, then I think the role of the president is to ensure that the conversation about good outcomes takes place, and to also say, what's next? If we're doing this well, what next is incumbent on us as we think about success? Success is a moving target. It's not a point. And so we're constantly asking, what should we be doing next to improve the quality of education that we offer our students.
As you're doing all this work and leading the university, you've been described by others as a gentle bridge builder. You've said about yourself that you're going to make it clear to everyone that we're going to get a decision, we're going to get it on this timeline, and we're going to move forward. Where is the line for leaders between engaging people in the conversation, trying to reach engagement, and just making the decision and going forward?
You know, I'd be a very wealthy woman if I had that answer completely right. I think it's always a moving target. I think context, again, is very important. One of the hardest things I think that a leader has to deal with is the confusion between being listened to and getting what you want done. So students or faculty or whomever may come with a particular concern, and one listens. And very often, if the leader doesn't address the concern in the way the people bringing the concern want the concern addressed, the interpretation is, I was not heard, I was not listened to. And I think that's where the leader has to listen and then make the best judgment possible by dealing with many conflicting priorities and being deeply rooted in the mission of the institution. And there are always people who are unhappy.
Now, when you do the talks, you give the talk almost every year to the Fulbright scholars and students going to sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes.
And one of the things you talk about is remind them that as scholars going there, they don't have all the answers.
Right.
Do leaders sometimes fall into that trap of thinking that they have all the answers?
Absolutely. And it's a very dangerous trap. Power can be very seductive. And I think, again, one has to listen carefully to others' ideas as well as one's own ideas, sift through all of them. And I think, particularly in contemporary leadership, a team is very important. And a diverse team is very important. A team that can handle conflict within the group so that you get to the best answer. And sometimes the best answer is a little piece of everybody's. Sometimes the best answer is your answer. But you've got to have a team that you trust. And you've got to have a team that trusts you enough not to tell you what you want to hear, but for them to also give you their best advice.
You've made the argument elsewhere that for someone to be perceived and to be an effective leader in the 21st century, they need to have intercultural competence and they need to have global perspective. Mm-hmm. What is intercultural competence and why is it so important for leaders in the 21st century?
I think all we have to do is look at what is happening in North Africa right now to know that the world is deeply connected. Something happened in Libya and the oil prices went berserk. And because we are so interconnected, because the work that people do now can have you in London on Monday and in India on Tuesday, it is very important to have a sense of the importance of culture and the fact that the way I see the world may not be the way you see the world, and that the way I see the world is not automatically correct. So a sensitivity that when you go into another context, there is something for you to learn, and that you might need to step back and be a bit humble as you are learning it, and that you might have to change the way you negotiate is very critical.
I've got one last question, Eileen. We as a nation are going towards universal health coverage. Buckminster Fuller, one of my favorite thinkers, said we needed universal college free. Let's make the assumption, hypothetically, the nation decides to go that direction. You wake up tomorrow morning, you're the new cabinet official charged with making that happen. Mm-hmm. How do you do universal college for free and maintain the quality of the universities? Just a thumbnail approach.
Mm-hmm. You improve the quality of high schools. That's the insertion. And of course, you can't improve high schools unless you improve all the way down. But it would be by improving K-12 and holding the standards, and I would argue, in fact, improving the standards in some of our institutions by asking each institution to find a way to document its effectiveness. I think that's how you would make that happen.
Thanks for being here, Eileen.
Thank you for having me.
Please join us again next time for another edition of Leaders on Leadership. See you then.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration.
An encore presentation of Leaders on Leadership is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.